Once upon a time, in a small village deep in the heart of Africa, there lived a boy named Kofi. The village was surrounded by dense forests with tall trees that seemed to touch the sky. The villagers lived a simple lives, farming the land, raising animals, and gathering around fire each night to share stories. Kofi lived with his father, Kwame, who was a well-respected man in the village. Everyone knew Kwame as a hardworking and a kind man who loved his son dearly. Kofi's mother had died when he was just a baby. She had fallen ill one rainy season, and despite the effort of the village healer, she did not survive. Kwame was heartbroken, but he knew he had to be strong for his son. He raised Kofi with all the love and care he could muster, teaching him how to farm, fish, and respect the ways of their ancestors. Years passed, and Kofi grew into a bright and cheerful boy. But as he grew older, Kwame began to worry. He knew that Kofi needed a mother's care, someone who could teach him things that a father could not. Kwame decided it was time to remarry. He met a woman named Amma, who had recently moved to their village from a distant land. Amma was beautiful with long black hair and eyes that sparkled like the night sky. The villagers were curious about her, as she kept to herself and released and doesn't speak with anyone. But Kwame was captivated by her beauty and kindness, so he asked her to be his wife. Amma agreed to marry Kwame, and soon she moved into their home. At first, everything seemed perfect. Amma was kind to Kofi, cooking his favorite meals and telling him stories before bed. Kofi began to feel happy again, thinking that he finally had a mother who cared for him. Amma would comb Kofi's hair, making sure it was neat and tidy, and she would sing him songs in a language he did not understand but found soothing. Kofi felt a warmth in his heart that he hadn't felt since his mother passed away. But as time went on, things began to change. Amma's kindness started to fade, replaced by coldness and cruelty. It began with small things. She would ask Kofi to fetch water from the river or gather firewood from the forest, tasks that were usually reserved for older boys. Kofi didn't mind at first, wanting to help his new mother, but the task grew harder and more frequent. Amma would give him chores that took hours to complete, leaving him exhausted by the end of the day. One hot afternoon, Amma asked Kofi to go to the river and fetch water. It was a long walk and the sun was high in the sky, making the ground hot. Kofi grabbed a large clay pot and began his journey to the river. The path to the river was narrow, winding through the dense forest. The trees provided some shade, but the heat was still intense. As Kofi neared the river, he heard a noise in the bush. He stopped, his heart pounding in his chest. Out of the bushes slithered a large black snake. Its eyes were like two glowing embers, and its tongue flicked out as it moved closer to Kofi. Kofi's hands trembled as he tried to hold onto the pot, but fear overtook him and the pot slipped from his hands, shattering on the ground. The snake hissed and passed and went back into the bush, disappearing into the thick underbush. Kofi stood there, frozen with fear, his heart racing. He knew he had to return home, but he dreaded facing Amma without the water she had asked for. When Kofi finally returned home, his clothes were drenched in water and his hands were trembling. Amma was waiting for him at the door, her arms crossed and a frown on her face. "Where is the water?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Kofi looked down at his feet, too scared to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry, stepmother. A snake appeared and I got scared." The pot slipped and it broke. Amma's eyes narrowed as she glared at Kofi. "You useless child," she shouted. "How could you be so careless?" Do you know how hard it is to make a clay pot? Do you know how much time and effort it takes? Tears welled up in Kofi's eyes, but he didn't dare cry in front of Amma. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Sorry won't bring back the pot, will it? Amma spat. You will go back to the river tomorrow and fetch water, and if you come back without it, you will not eat. Kofi nodded, too scared to say anything else. He felt a knot form in his stomach as he realized that Amma's kindness had disappeared completely. She had become someone else, someone cold and cruel. That night, Kofi lay in his bed, staring up the ceiling. He missed his mother more than ever. He remembered how she used to hold him when he was scared, how she would sing to him and tell him everything would be okay. But now, there was no one to comfort him. His father, Kwame, was often away working in the field, leaving Kofi alone with Amma. As the days turned into weeks, Amma's treatment of Kofi grew worse. She gave him the hardest chores, making him work from dawn until dusk. She would scold him for the smallest mistakes, calling him lazy and worthless. Kofi, once a bright and cheerful boy, is now replaced by sadness and exhaustion. He would often go to bed hungry because Amma would withhold food as punishment for not completing his chores to her satisfaction. Kwame noticed that Kofi seemed sad and tired all the time. He asked Amma if something was wrong, but she always had an excuse ready. Kofi is just lazy, she would say. He needs to learn to be responsible or he will never grow into a proper man. Kwame trusted Amma and believed her words. He did not know how cruel she was, being to Kofi behind his back. Kofi, on the other hand, knew something was very wrong with his stepmother. She was not like other women in the village. She would disappear into the forest late at night only to return just before dawn. Kofi would hear strange noises coming from her room, chanting, whispers, and even the sound of a cock. Kofi's suspicion grew stronger each day. He started paying close attention to Amma's movements, trying to understand what she was up to. He noticed that she would often leave the house with a small bag, which she kept hidden under her bed. Whenever she thought no one was watching, she would take the bag and head into the forest. Kofi knew he had to find out what was inside the bag and where she went at night. One night, when the moon was full and the village was silent, Kofi decided to follow Amma into the bush. He waited until everyone was asleep, then quietly crept out of the house. The night was dark with only the light of the moon to guide him. Kofi's heart pounded in his chest as he followed Amma, careful to keep a safe distance so she wouldn't notice him. Amma walked swiftly through the forest as if she knew exactly where she was going. The trees seemed to close in around Kofi as he followed her deeper into the woods. The forest was alive with the sounds of creatures and occasional rustling of leaves as something moved in the underbush. Kofi fear grew with every step, but he knew he had to keep going. After what felt like hours of walking, Amma finally reached a clearing in the forest. Kofi hid behind a large tree, peeking out to see what she was doing. In the center of the clearing was a large fire pit surrounded by stones arranged in a circle. Amma knelt beside the fire. Pit began to chant in a language Kofi had never heard before. Her voice was low and melodic, but there was something unsettling about it. Kofi watched in horror as Amma took out strange herbs from her bag and threw them into the fire pit. She continued chanting, and as the herbs burned, a thick smoke rose from the pit, swirling into the air above her. The smoke began to form shape that no one could understand. He had heard stories of witches before, evil women who used dark magic to harm others, but he had never imagined that his own stepmother could be one of them. Kofi's hands shook as he tried to stay hidden, but in his fear, he accidentally stepped on a dry twig. The sound echoed through the silent forest, and Amma stopped her chanting, turning her head sharply in his direction. Who is there? She called as her voice no longer soft and melodic, but harsh. Kofi's breath caught in his throat as he tried to press himself closer to the tree, but it was too late. Amma had seen him. Her eyes glowed with a sinister light as she stood up and began to walk towards him. "Come out, boy," she commanded, her voice sending shivers down Kofi's spine. Kofi stepped out from behind the tree, trembling with fear. Amma's face, once kind and warm, was now twisted with anger and malice. Her eyes, glowing with an unnatural light, seemed to pierce through Kofi's soul. He could hardly believe that the woman who had once combed his hair and sang him song could now be filled with such hatred. "What are you doing here?" Amma hissed, her voice dripped with venom. "How dare you follow me?" Kofi's voice was barely a whisper as he tried to explain. "I was worried about you, stepmother. I thought you might be in danger." Amma's lips coiled into a cruel smile. "You foolish child, you have no idea what danger is. You should have stayed in your bed where you belong. But now that you have seen what you should not have, you must pay the price." Kofi's heart pounded in his chest as he realized that he was in grave danger. He wanted to run to escape into safety of the village, but his legs felt heavy as if they were rooted to the ground. Amma began to chant once more, her voice rising in pitch as she
mylifeng.com.
raised her hands towards the sky. The smoke from the fire pit coiled around Kofi, tightening like a snake. He could feel his strength leaving his body, his vision blurring as the world around him began to fade. Just as Kofi thought he would be lost forever, a bright light appeared like thunder from the sky, illuminating the dark forest. The light grew brighter and brighter until it was almost blinding. Amma shielded his eyes. He narrated the story to his father, but he was so shocked and sorry for what he has caused his son. According to him, he told his father that immediately the light illuminated the forest, that Amma disappeared, that he didn't see her again. The father took Kofi to the villagers, and there he narrated the whole story to them, and the villagers were like, "Yes, we suspected that this woman, something is really wrong, that she doesn't look normal. There is something so secretive about her." The villagers were all murmuring, and Kofi's father was very sorry for what he has caused his son. So what do you understand by this story? Let me have your comments in the comment section. To my returning subscribers, I love you all. To my new subscribers, may the Almighty God continue to bless you all. Thank you for always supporting me. Despite not being the best in this industry,